Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Crooked Chicken video. Today's video is going to be over the latest episode, Daryl Dixon. Another great episode. This show has not been disappointing remotely, so I just want to take a minute to talk about the episode, give a quick recap, and just what we could possibly see throughout the rest of the series. But this last episode obviously continues with the group making their way to Paris, or making their way to their ending point of their journey to get Daryl on his boat, get Laurent where he needs to be. But this episode was definitely, it had its musical parts and everything. And so they're making their way, they're traveling these parts, they come across this man who's living in this theater. I guess the whole point of them going in here is to see that he's another man that's possibly has a radio that Daryl can make some kind of communications with, but they get in there and they see this guy, and he is just completely off his rocker. The isolation and just him dealing with it the way he is just completely lost his mind. And we see that the radio that he did have is completely torn in pieces. He's wanting the record player to play this music that one can assume that maybe at one point his job was being a composer, because he goes off to show this band that is composed of walkers and walker pieces and them tied in place, and he's just up there doing his thing, composing this band, and you got walkers that are just tied in certain positions, so every time they kind of move, they hit drums, or with walker torsos with musical wind instruments shoved down their windpipes. It's just a really odd thing, and you can tell the whole time that they're watching this, they're like, this dude is just fucking out of his mind. And they just kind of sit there to entertain his idea or whatever, and slowly make their way out of there, because they can see that this guy is just, he's long gone. And this whole time, Laurent and Sylvie are sitting outside waiting for him. And this is where a walker kind of approaches out of nowhere, and Daryl and Isabel make their way back out. And this is where Daryl says, we tried it your way, we're going to do it my way. And he proceeds to blow this walker's head off. And so you see walkers just kind of spilling out of the woodwork now, and they continue on. And so they're making their way, they go through a graveyard, and then we start hearing the French version of Strangers by Jim Morrison and the Doors. And we actually get to see the grave of Jim Morrison, because if you didn't know, he is buried in Paris. And so we see this grave, and Daryl proceeds to tell them who he is. He's a rock star from America. And after they see this and they kind of make their way into the graveyard a little bit more, we come across Falou and his group. Now, Falou and his group, they are obviously, from what I can tell anyways, they are just another pit stop along the way. They're a group that are waiting for them, that this is the man who says, we've been waiting to meet you for a long time, referring to Laurent. And so they take them in to their community, and just everyone sees Laurent as Isabel has, as he is maybe a prophet or just a miracle child, or whatever you want to call him. And people are immediately greeting him with gifts, and he goes to comfort this woman who recently lost her husband, and just no one else has been able to provide any kind of comfort. She refuses food, and he immediately brings this woman to give him a hug. And this kind of further pushes the theory that he is some child of God, that he has special abilities, or however you want to look at it. And naturally, Daryl says, is there a way that you can get me back home? Is there people that you know? Do you have radio communications that can get me where I want to be? And not so much. They have carrier pigeons, and they say, it could be a few days, or it could be a month before we hear anything back. And Daryl's just not having it. He doesn't want any part of this carrier pigeon. He doesn't have the patience. And so it's with this determination that he wants to get back home. It kind of hurts Isabel's feelings. You can kind of see it, that it hurt her feelings that she doesn't want him to go. It may not be a romantic kind of feeling that she's having for him, but just having this friend that she can kind of relate to, because they both have traumatizing pasts, or complicated pasts at most. And so she can't understand why he's in such a hurry to leave, but at the same time, she does understand that he just wants to go home back to his family, but she's just not ready to see him go. So Daryl pushes him for information, pushes Falou for information about who else could be around that could get him in communication with his home, or with people that can get him on a ship back home, or any possibility of such. And he mentions one other possibility. So it's with this that Daryl and Isabel make their way to this location, but they kind of make a pit stop in the area where Isabel lived. We get to see Isabel's former home, and so they go there, and she is there to pick up that stash because it's kind of insinuated or whatever that they're going to need something to trade information for. That they need something that they can give these people that they will be willing to help them. So she goes back and retrieves her old stash, which, aside from being money and credit cards, which is useless at this point, that it is drugs and different pieces of jewelry or what have you. And she takes these things, and this is her bargaining chip. This is what she's going to use to help Daryl get his way home and everything. So they go to this club, which, from what I mentioned in a previous video, is actually underground, obviously for safety reasons, and they make their way through the catacombs. And this is where Fulu kind of explains to Daryl, we've survived one apocalypse, we'll survive this one, kind of referring to the Black Plague and everything, because that's what's buried in a lot of these catacombs, is the remains of people that perished in the Black Plague way back when. And so they make their way to this nightclub. They're talking to this man about if they know anybody that has a boat or a way for Daryl to get back home, and they're kind of dancing around the idea, I guess, that yes, they may know people and they're gonna go take these things from Isabel, and Daryl is just not having it. He does not trust these people. He sees that they're kind of full of shit and takes a swing at one, and this is where we get the reveal that the man in charge of the nightclub is actually Quinn. Now, we saw Quinn back in episode 2 in the flashback where Isabel leaves him behind with her sister Lily to get away. And I knew that Quinn is alive. He's running this club. And this is just kind of the first bits of shock for the episode. We get some more information regarding Quinn. I kind of called this information as well in another video. But they talk to Quinn. They go into this back room to have this discussion of what he can do to help them or whatever. And he says, where's your sister? Blah, blah, blah. And she reveals that she died during childbirth. And this kind of triggers back to the previous episode in the flashback where we see that Quinn's wanting to get rid of Lily when he finds out that she's pregnant. And obviously, why would he want to get rid of her unless there was some indiscretion that he's not revealing to Isabel? And this is where he finds out that she did have a child. He's still alive. And he says, well, this is my son because me and Lily had a mistake of an evening or whatever you want to call it. And you can see that Isabel, even though it's been so long and she probably assumed at some point or another that Quinn was dead, this information still hurts her. She does not want to hear this. The fact that he was unfaithful to her and he was supposed to be only for her, be her friend, help her through these things, and obviously at some point be her lover. But she kind of pushes past this, and it's funny too because they're really letting the F-bombs fly in the series, which I'm really liking. And Daryl kind of steps in. He does not trust Quinn at all. He just, immediately, he's just like, fuck this guy. And he's wanting to leave out of here. And this whole kind of conversation or what have you is interrupted by Kodron showing back up. Now, Kodron, earlier in the episode, he goes to meet Madame Genet, which we find out this is the first time that he's meeting her. There was always kind of that speculation or that wondering, did he know her previously? And he did not. He goes to her for help to go after Daryl because he talks to her and finds out that she is also looking for him. She assumes he's drowned. And this is where Kodron reveals that no, he is not in fact drowned. And that he promised his parents that he would take care of his baby brother. And Daryl made a liar of him, is specifically what he says. And so he's wanting to go after Daryl, get revenge for the death of his brother. And so it's this big thing where she immediately takes his help, and flash forward back to the episode where we're in that nightclub. Kodron shows up with his little group of people, and they get the information that they're looking for Daryl, and he pops up again later while Daryl, Isabel, Laurent, they're back at the settlements with Fulu on top of these rooftops. And Daryl is discussing with Isabel that after everything, she needs to stop lying to Laurent about who he is, how he came to be, because during her little trip into town to get the things that she needed to trade for information, she actually got a picture of Lily to give Laurent, so he has something to take comfort in. This is a picture of his mother in front of the Eiffel Tower on her birthday, and also during that same little excursion, that we get some more variant-type action, where they're making their way out of this area, and Isabel unfortunately comes across the little girl that we saw in the second episode during the flashback that she tells to go home. This girl has since obviously died, and she is a walker. And as they're making their way out of there, this is the scene where we see all these walkers falling out of the sky, out of these buildings. And the thing that just really kind of amps me up, and we see that scene where Isabel is visibly terrified. And this is after a walker has hit the ground. This is a burner. This thing, for lack of a better word, pulls itself back together, creaking its bones back in place, and gets up after falling, 50 feet or whatever from an apartment building or wherever they're at, and proceeds to come after her while Daryl is trying to get his way through this back gate. And he actually uses the burner, sticks it, and pushes it up against this gate to cut through and melt through these vines that have since grown over all the doors. And so we get to see kind of the limits at which these walkers can push. That these things can fall out of buildings and still get back up and still come after you. And this is just kind of the first instance of variations or variants of walkers in this episode. We get kind of another scene of this when when Condron is enlisting the help of Madame Genet. We see that they're experimenting further on walkers, and this thing is chained to a wall in a room, and she says, how are things going? How the experiment's going? And as she's asking this, the two men that were in the room with that walker leave the room in a hurry. This thing rips chains out of the walls and charges at the glass. And this is one where we see the walker bash his face against the glass. And it only lasts for about, I want to say 18 seconds was the timeout, or 15 seconds. And then this thing proceeds to die. Like, they are injecting it with different things. This is part of their experimentation to make these things more aggressive and even strong enough to rip chains out of walls. So that right there is kind of terrifying. So after all of this, after Condron tracks Daryl down back to this settlement on these rooftops, he's going after him. And we see that he chases after Daryl, and they get into another fist fight. And we can see that from this fist fight, Daryl is probably the more skilled fighter. And he is on the verge of beating Condron, but he gets interrupted by his men shooting at him. Daryl gets up, takes off, and the episode kind of ends on kind of a silly note. We see Daryl standing there, and we start hearing the roof begin to crack, and he looks down, and in my opinion, he really had some time to react, but he just kind of has that moment where he looks down, looks back up, and then falls to the roof. And so it's kind of a silly thing where it was probably not 100% needed, but at the same time, maybe they're just trying to throw a little comedic timing in there. I'm not sure. But as a whole, the episode was great, just like the others. This show is presenting on all fronts, in my opinion. They're just doing it in different ways with the variants, with the F-bombs, however kind of minuscule that detail is. I think it just breathes a sort of new life into it, along with just the storytelling. With Isabel, I just really like her character. I think that she is a breath of fresh air as far as this show is concerned. And just, she is a very deep, interesting character, and I think that she could carry everything pretty much on her own as far as progression of the story. But as far as the whole episode is concerned, another good episode. We got 3 down, 3 more to go. And as far as Quinn is concerned, from what I've seen and what I can kind of deduct from other trailers and sneak peeks or what have you, I don't think he makes it, which is kind of a shame, but at the same time probably needed, because I think he's going to prove himself to be a pretty awful person. I mean, he wanted to ditch the mother of his child when the world was going to hell, and I don't think he even remotely feels bad about it. Even though, yes, his son was born, he did survive, and he said that he should have known regardless of the circumstance. Well, I guess the end of the world was not a good enough circumstance for him, or whatever. It just kind of leads to question, what did he do to get in this position of power over this nightclub? Because he mentions that he had an arrangement with Madame Genet that they would leave them alone. So what did he do to get that arrangement? And just So we do get a lot of information revealed and kind of confirmed in this episode, but it does lead to some other questions. And as far as this group that Madame Genet is in charge of, that Condron kind of takes league with or whatever, there's still the big question that is, are these people CRM? I want to say at this point, I don't think so. I don't think they are CRM. I think they're just their own little group. They're doing their own little experiments with the walkers, because we see that, yes, they have these ones that can rip chains out of walls, or we got the burners. So obviously, they're not a natural mutation of the virus. They are a product of experimentation. That much I think at this point is clear, that they're not something that was just brought about that changed over time with the Walker virus. These are obviously something that was changed in a lab. So I'm anxious to see what other variants we're going to see, if any, aside from the faster and stronger ones that Daryl's eventually going to have to face, because I think he does get captured in the next episode, and we're going to see him in that kind of gladiator setting where he's going to have to face this really fast, aggressive, scary walker. But anyways, guys, that was my kind of recap and review of the episode. Another great episode. Can't wait for the next one. I'm hearing that the last episode is one of the best ones. So that's maybe a little hard to say at this point, because every episode's been a great episode. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like down below, leave your comments, and as always, if you feel so inclined, please subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. So until next time, guys, I will see you later. Bye.